Imagine for a moment that you are standing on the top of a wall. Not a wall that anyone is attacking right now. Not a wall where anything dramatic is happening. Just a wall, a very long, very cold, very gray stone wall somewhere in the English countryside, sometime around the year 1347. The sun hasn't risen yet. It won't rise for another 2 hours. The sky above you is a deep, muted purple-black, and the only light comes from the torch mounted in the iron bracket, just to your left, a torch that you lit yourself about 40 minutes ago from the one in the guard room at the bottom of the stairs. You are wearing a padded linen jacket called an akiton, a mail coif around your head, and a thick wool surcoat over everything. Your feet are wrapped in linen strips inside your leather boots. It is October, and the wind comes in off the valley with a kind of damp, bone-settling chill that no amount of wool ever quite defeats. In your left hand, you carry a short spear, a billhook, technically, with a curved hook at the back of the blade. In your right hand, you carry nothing. Your right hand is tucked under your opposite arm, keeping warm. Your job for the next 4 hours is to walk slowly, back and forth along this section of the north wall, approximately 60 feet, from the corner tower to the point where the walkway meets the gatehouse. Then back, then forward again, 60 feet at a time, back and forth in the cold and the dark, while the rest of the castle sleeps below you. This is what a medieval castle guard does. Not the kind of guard who stands at the king's elbow during a feast that's a household night. And that's a different job with different clothes and a much better diet. Not the kind of guard you see in paintings, gleaming in polished plate armor, dramatic and heroic. Just a garrison soldier. A working man. A man whose name almost certainly does not appear in any chronicle or history book, because the history books were written about the interesting things, the battles, the treaties, the coronations, and this man's daily life was, by almost any standard, profoundly uninteresting. Which is exactly why we're going to talk about it tonight. Welcome to Boring History for Sleep. I'm your narrator, and tonight we're going to spend some time in the year 1347, inside a middling English castle, not a famous one, not a royal one, just the kind of castle that housed a local lord, managed his lands, and employed somewhere between 20 and 60 men at arms and garrison soldiers at any given time. We're going to follow one of those men. Let's call him Thomas, through a week of his life. Not the exciting week. Not the week when the Scottish border raiders appeared on the ridge, or when the new lord arrived with his retinue and everyone scrambled to make the great hall presentable. The ordinary week. The week in October when nothing happened except the usual things, done in the usual order at the usual hours. We'll talk about how Thomas slept and where, what he ate and when, and how the food was prepared and stored. We'll walk the patrol routes with him, the north wall, the south ward, the gatehouse, and we'll light the torches together as the October dusk settles in. We'll check the grain stores and count the barrels of salted fish in the larder, and we'll note, with the attention to detail that a garrison soldier must develop, the small signs of everything being in order. Because that, above all else, is the job to confirm, hour after hour, day after day, that everything is in order. Let's begin. The castle where Thomas serves is not large by the standards of a royal fortress, but it is a solid, functional structure that has been expanded and modified over the past 2 centuries since its original construction. At its core is the keep, a rectangular stone tower, 3 stories high, with walls nearly 8 feet thick at the base. This is the oldest part of the structure, built sometime in the 1170s or 1180s, and it retains the slightly austere, no-nonsense character of Norman construction. The ground floor of the keep is used almost entirely for storage barrels of salted pork, sacks of oats, crates of dried legumes, and the castle's small arsenal of extra weapons and armor, all packed in with a kind of compressed, practical order. The great hall where the lord and his household eat, conduct business, and receive visitors is a separate building, a long, relatively low structure added to the southern side of the inner ward sometime in the 1220s. It is better lit than the keep, has larger windows, and on the coldest nights retains a faint residual warmth from the central hearth that can last until nearly dawn. Thomas does not live in the keep or the great hall. Thomas lives in the Garrison barracks, which occupies one side of the outer ward, the lower, less prestigious courtyard enclosed by the outer curtain wall. It is a long, low building of timber and plaster, divided into 3 sections: the main sleeping hall, a small armory room where personal weapons are kept and maintained, and a space at the far end that serves variously as a dining area, a card-playing area, and in bad weather, a place to simply sit and exist without getting rained on. The sleeping hall contains 18 pallets, straw mattresses on low wooden frames, each separated from its neighbor by the width of an outstretched arm. Each pallet has a wool blanket and, in winter, a second blanket drawn from the Garrison stores. The pallets are arranged in 2 rows of 9, with a narrow aisle between them. At the far end is a small iron brazier that is kept lit through the night, burning the compressed blocks of charcoal that are stored in a basket beside the door. Thomas has slept on the 4th pallet from the door, left side, for 3 years. It is not his pallet by any formal arrangement. No one officially assigns them, but everyone knows it is his, because that is how things work in a garrison. Tradition fills in the gaps that formal rules leave empty. His nearest neighbors are Walter, who has been in garrison service for 11 years, and knows every shortcut and informal arrangement the castle has to offer, and a younger man named Robert, who arrived 6 months ago and is still in the process of learning how things work here. On this particular Monday in October, it is not quite 4 in the morning. Thomas wakes not to a bell or a horn, but to the sound of the duty sergeant, a broad-shouldered man named Edmund, moving through the sleeping hall with a lantern. Edmund does not shout or knock on things. He simply walks slowly between the rows of pallets, holding the lantern low, and the light and the sound of footsteps are enough. Thomas has been in garrison service for 6 years. He wakes up the same way he always does, all at once, with no intermediate state between asleep and fully conscious. This is a skill the body develops when it must. He sits up, puts his feet on the cold packed earth floor, and reaches for his boots. The morning preparation follows a sequence that Thomas has performed so many times it requires no thought. Boots first. The leather strips for his feet were rewrapped the night before, so he simply pulls them on and laces them. Then the padded acquaintance, which he slept partly in, wearing the lower half and using the upper portion as an extra layer over his blanket. He folds his blanket in thirds, always thirds, the same fold, so it fits under the wooden shelf at the back of his pallet in the correct way. Then the wool surcoat. Then the mail coif, which he coils from the hook at the end of his pallet and fits over his head with practiced ease. The whole process takes perhaps 6 minutes. He takes his bill hook from the armory room, signed out by name in the Garrison ledger, which Edmund keeps with the care of a man who knows exactly what happens when weapons go unaccounted for, and he makes his way to the outer ward. The first job of the morning is not the patrol. The first job of the morning is the torches. The castle has approximately 40 torch brackets mounted at regular intervals along its walls, at the gatehouse, at the base of the keep, at the main stairs into the great hall, and at various other junctions and doorways throughout the inner and outer wards. Not all of them are lit at all times that would consume an impractical quantity of tar and hemp torches, but the key positions are maintained through the night, and by 4 in the morning, the torches that were lit at dusk are burning low. Thomas's first task each Monday, Wednesday, and Friday morning is to replace the torches along the north wall and the east side of the outer curtain. He carries a canvas bag containing 6 fresh torches, a small pot of rendered tallow for relighting, and a piece of struck fire steel and flint wrapped in dry cloth. The replacement takes about 40 minutes, moving from bracket to bracket, pulling the old torch stub, seating the new one, and lighting it, if necessary, from the one before. When a torch has been burning for hours and is nearly out, it doesn't go dark suddenly. It gutters, the flame shrinks, and the light turns amber and unsteady, throwing longer shadows than a healthy flame. Thomas knows the look well. He can tell at a glance, from 30 feet away, whether a torch has an hour left in it or 10 minutes. This is not knowledge he studied. It is knowledge that simply accumulated in him over years of doing this job in the dark. By the time he finishes the torches and returns the canvas bag to the Garrison stores, the sky to the east is showing the first faint suggestion of gray, not light, exactly, but a reduction of darkness. The birds begin around this time. Not many, and not enthusiastically. It is October, and most of the summer birds have gone, but there are rooks in the large elm trees at the edge of the outer bailey, and they begin their shuffling, argumentative morning activity well before sunrise. Thomas stands in the outer ward for a moment and listens to them. Then he goes to breakfast. The Garrison does not eat in the Great Hall. The Great Hall is for the Lord's household, his family, his household knights, his steward and chaplain and personal servants, and any guests who happen to be staying. The Garrison soldiers eat in their own section of the outer ward, in the long, low building that functions as barracks, dining hall, and common room combined. Breakfast in October is a standardized and relatively consistent affair, a bowl of pottage and a piece of bread. The pottage is made in the Garrison kitchen, a separate, small outbuilding attached to the back of the barracks, starting from a base of oats or barley simmered in water, to which the cook adds whatever is available and suitable that day. This might be dried peas or beans, added the previous evening and left to soften overnight. It might be onions, which are plentiful in autumn and keep well. It might include a small portion of salted pork, if the Garrison is in a period of reasonable provisioning, though the salt pork is rationed and not always available at every meal. The bread is a dense, coarse-textured loaf made from maslin flour, a mixture of wheat and rye, baked in the castle's main bakehouse. The Garrison receives its bread allotment each morning, delivered in a wooden tray by one of the bakehouse assistants. One small loaf per man, or a larger loaf divided between 2 men, if the ratios work out that way. The bread from Monday's baking will have been made from dough started on Sunday evening. By Wednesday, the bread from Monday's bake is stale enough to be better soaked in the pottage than eaten dry. By Friday, it is hard. Thomas sits at the long table in the Garrison eating area with the 7 men who are coming off the night watch and the 4 or 5 who are waiting for their morning assignments. There is conversation, but it is the muted, unhurried conversation of men who are tired or not yet fully awake. Someone says something about a loose stone in the east wall parapet. Someone else says the cook has put too much salt in the pottage. A third man says the cook puts too much salt in everything and has done so for 12 years, and there is no point mentioning it. Thomas eats methodically. The pottage is hot and the bowl is warming to hold, and outside it is cold. So this is a genuinely pleasant moment in his morning, not a luxury, not an indulgence, just warmth and the specific comfort of warm food after cold hours. Breakfast takes perhaps 20 minutes. Then the day's formal assignments begin. Every morning after breakfast, Sergeant Edmund reads from the Garrison Ledger. The Garrison Ledger is a bound book of parchment pages kept in a locked wooden box in the armory room. It contains the duty roster for the current week, who is assigned to which watch, which patrol route, which maintenance task, as well as running records of the garrison's supplies, the state of the castle's equipment, and notes on anything that has been reported as needing attention. Edmund has kept this ledger for 9 years. His predecessor kept the one before it. The ledger represents, in its quiet and practical way, an unbroken chain of documentation that stretches back to when this castle was first properly garrisoned, a record of who was where and what was counted and what was done, day after day, year after year, in the methodical administration of a working fortress. This Monday, Thomas's assignments are as follows. Morning wall patrol from 6 to 10, followed by a midday rest period, followed by an afternoon assignment to assist with the quarterly provisions inventory in the undercroft of the keep, followed by the early evening torch lighting round, followed by the first night watch from 10 at night until 2 in the morning. It is a full day. The wall patrol is exactly what it sounds like. Thomas takes his billhook, confirms his starting position with the outgoing patrol, a man named Hugh, who has been on since 2 in the morning and looks comprehensively tired, and begins walking. The north wall is the long wall, running approximately 300 feet from the northwest corner tower to the northeast gatehouse tower. The walkway on top of the wall, called the wall walk or chemin, Durand in the French-influenced terminology that has filtered into English military usage, is approximately 6 feet wide. Bounded on the exterior by the crenellated parapet, the alternating raised and lowered sections called merlons and crenels, and on the interior by a low rubble stone parapet about 3 feet high. The wall walk surface is stone irregular, slightly uneven, worn smooth in the center by generations of feet, and rougher near the edges where fewer people step. In dry weather, it is simply cold and hard. After rain, it becomes slick in the low spots where water pools between the slightly tilted paving stones. After frost, which October is beginning to produce on clear nights, it can be genuinely treacherous in the pre-dawn hours before the sun hits it. Thomas walks at a measured pace approximately 2 minutes to cover the length of the north wall in one direction, a brief pause at the corner tower to check in with the guard there, then back again. He does this continuously for 4 hours, with one 10-minute break around 8 o'clock when Walter comes to relieve him temporarily so he can step down to use the latrines and get a cup of water from the Garrison well. What is he watching for? In the immediate, practical sense, anything unusual. Movement in the tree line at the edge of the outer fields. Smoke from an unexpected direction. A gap in the woodline that wasn't there yesterday. Strange tracks in the mud of the outer ditch. A horse or a group of horses where no horses are expected. The appearance of any person approaching who has not been signaled from the previous watchtower down the road. In the broader, more routine sense, he is watching for nothing. He is watching to confirm that nothing is wrong, that the fields are empty in the expected way, that the road is quiet in the expected way, that the valley and the woodline and the horizon, the same unremarkable arrangement they presented yesterday and the day before. This confirmation of normality is the fundamental product of the wall patrol. It is not exciting. It requires a particular mental state, alert enough to notice when something is different, calm enough not to manufacture significance in ordinary things. Thomas has developed this state, the way he developed the ability to wake up quickly through repetition, over years, until it became simply the way his mind operates when he is on patrol. The morning passes in this way. The sky lightens from gray to white to a thin, washed-out blue. The rooks continue their activities in the elm trees. At around 7:30, one of the kitchen boys crosses the outer ward below with a bucket, heading toward the well. He waves up at Thomas. Thomas acknowledges with a brief nod. At the northeast corner tower, there is a narrow window opening that looks directly north. At this time of year, on a clear morning, the low sun angling in from the southeast catches the top of the distant ridge and turns it briefly golden before the light spreads and flattens. Thomas has seen this effect probably 500 times. It is still a thing he notices and finds, in a quiet way, agreeable. At 10 o'clock, Thomas is relieved from the wall patrol by the midday watch and descends to the Garrison hall. He sleeps for approximately 2 hours. Garrison soldiers learn to sleep whenever they have the opportunity, and Thomas can fall asleep within minutes in any relatively horizontal position, then rises at around noon to eat a midday meal of bread, hard cheese, and a cup of ale. The afternoon assignment, beginning at the second hour past noon, is the quarterly provisions inventory. This is one of the most important administrative tasks of the Garrison year, and it is entirely without drama. It consists, in its essence, of going into every space in the castle where food or supplies are stored, counting what is there, and recording the count in the Garrison ledger. Thomas assists the castle steward's clerk, a quiet young man named Jeffrey, who is very good with numbers and very bad with cold, and who today is wearing 2 cloaks and still looks miserable, in conducting this inventory of the keep Undercroft and the adjacent Larder buildings. The Undercroft is the ground floor of the keep, and it is the castle's primary deep storage space. It is a low, vaulted stone room, supported by thick pillars, with a packed earth floor that is always cool and stays cool even in summer. This thermal stability is precisely why it serves as the main storage area. Cool, consistent temperature is ideal for preserving the kinds of food that a medieval castle needs to maintain in quantity. The contents of the Undercroft in October include the following, which Thomas and Jeffrey now count and record methodically: 17 barrels of salted pork, each barrel sealed with a wooden lid pegged down and then coated with a layer of tallow to exclude air. The pork was salted in late August, after the autumn slaughter of the older pigs, and the barrels have been standing in the Undercroft since early September. Geoffrey taps each barrel with a mallet and listens to the sound. A full barrel makes a certain resonance. A partially depleted one sounds different. And Geoffrey can estimate the contents by sound alone with an accuracy that Thomas finds genuinely impressive. 23 sacks of wheat flour, each sack weighing approximately 40 pounds, stacked in 3 rows against the north wall. The flour was ground at the castle mill, a water mill on the stream to the east, and delivered in the first week of October. Each sack is tied at the top with a length of linen cord. Geoffrey checks the cord of each sack for tampering and notes that 2 of the sacks in the bottom row show signs of moisture absorption from the floor. He marks them as priority use, to be drawn down before the others. 14 sacks of dried peas and beans, mixed, from the garden harvest. These are less precisely organized than the flour. The sacks are of varying sizes, and the contents include several different varieties of pea and bean, but Geoffrey counts them, estimates the total weight, and makes his entry. 11 barrels of ale, delivered from the castle brewery last week. Ale does not keep indefinitely, it ferments and eventually sours, so these barrels represent approximately 3 to 4 weeks of Garrison consumption. And a new delivery is expected before the end of the month. 6 barrels of salted fish herring, primarily with possibly some cod, acquired from the fish merchant who visits the village market every 2 weeks. The herring is layered in the barrels with coarse salt between each layer, a method that can preserve it for several months under good conditions. 58 sacks of oats, which are used in the Garrison pottage, and also to feed the horses in the castle stables. 7 wheels of hard cheese, each wrapped in cloth and sealed with a coat of wax. These are stored on wooden shelves against the east wall, slightly elevated from the floor. Geoffrey lifts each wheel and presses the wax coating, checking for cracks or soft spots that might indicate the cheese beneath has begun to spoil. A quantity of dried herbs, bundles of rosemary, thyme and bay, leaves hanging from iron hooks in the ceiling, used primarily in the Great Hall kitchen, but kept in the undercroft for its stable temperature. And in a separate section, divided from the food stores by a low stone wall, the equipment stores. Rope, canvas, wheel spokes and felloes for the castle's cart, iron nails in a wooden crate, replacement torch handles, 2 bundles of fresh, unfinished torches requiring only heads, various pieces of worn equipment awaiting repair. The counting takes approximately 2 hours. Geoffrey writes everything down in his small leather-bound notebook in a close, neat script, then reads it back while Thomas checks the tally against what they counted. When the numbers agree, which on this occasion they do for everything, except a discrepancy of 3 sacks of oats, which investigation reveals have been legitimately drawn by the stable master and simply not yet noted in the ledger, Geoffrey closes his book with satisfaction. The Count has confirmed what both of them already expected. The castle is adequately provisioned for winter. This is the outcome they were hoping for. The inventory has done its job. Nothing alarming has been discovered. Everything that should be there is there, in approximately the quantities it should be in. It is, in every measurable sense, an uneventful afternoon. The moment that marks the true beginning of the evening routine in a medieval castle is not a bell or a meal. It is the lighting of the torches. In summer, this happens late, sometimes not until 9 or 10 at night, when the long northern light finally fades. In midwinter, it can happen as early as 3 in the afternoon. In October, at this latitude, It happens around 5, sometimes a little before, on gray days, when the cloud cover accelerates the dusk. Sometimes a little after, on clear evenings, when the last light lingers in the western sky, past all expectation. Thomas's evening torch duty covers the inner ward, the gatehouse passage, the stairs to the great hall, the main door of the keep, the corner of the chapel wall, and the 3 brackets along the inner face of the south curtain wall. This is a shorter circuit than his morning torch run, and in terms of raw physical work, it takes perhaps 25 minutes. But it is a different experience at dusk than it is at 4 in the morning. In the morning, he is replacing burned-out torches in an already dark castle, restoring light to spaces that have been dark for hours. In the evening, he is creating darknesses opposite as the light fails. He moves through the inner ward with his canvas bag and his fire steel, and each torch he lights is a small, specific act of making the coming night navigable. There is a sequence to it, and the sequence matters. The gatehouse passage is lit first, because that is the primary point of entry, and anyone arriving in the early dusk will need to see their way through it. The keep door is lit next, because the steward and the constable both use the keep in the evening, and both are the kind of men who expect things to be properly in order when they arrive. The great hall stairs come third, followed by the chapel wall brackets, and the south curtain last. As he works his way around the circuit, the dusk deepens around him. What was gray becomes darker gray, becomes a blue-gray that isn't quite dark, but no longer has any useful light in it. The torches he lights behind him glow warmly, and when he passes through the gatehouse archway, he can see the torchlight from the gatehouse reflected in the cobblestones of the outer ward. The torches in this castle are made to a straightforward specification: a handle of seasoned wood hazel, usually, or ash, about 2 feet long, with a head of tightly bound hemp rope, twisted and compacted, that has been soaked in a mixture of rendered tallow and pine pitch. When lit, they burn steadily for approximately 2 hours under still conditions, somewhat less in wind. The tallow keeps the rope burning. The pitch adds body to the flame and helps it resist light rain. A good torch, properly made and lit in calm conditions, produces a light approximately equivalent to 5 or 6 wax candles, enough to illuminate a 6-foot radius clearly and cast useful light for perhaps 12 feet. It also produces a certain amount of black smoke, which over time deposits a film of soot on the stone above every torch bracket in the castle. The soot marks at the top of every bracket, splaying upward in a dark fan against the gray stone, are one of the ambient visual textures of castle life, as routine and unremarkable as the worn surface of the wall walk or the iron fittings on the great hall doors. By the time Thomas finishes the evening circuit and returns his canvas bag to the stores, it is fully dark. The inner ward glows with the 6 torches he has just lit, and the smell of torch smoke, that particular sharp, sweet scent of burning pine pitch and tallow, mingles with the autumn air and the distant smell of the great hall kitchen beginning its evening preparations. Supper in the Garrison hall happens at around 6 in the evening, early by modern standards, but logical for a working community that has been active since 4 in the morning. The meal is similar in structure to breakfast pottage, bread, and ale. It is somewhat heavier, reflecting the convention that supper is the main meal of the day for garrison soldiers. On days when meat is available, it appears at supper a piece of salt pork simmered with the pottage, or occasionally a portion of roasted bird. usually pigeon from the castle dovecote or the small pheasants that are common in the local woodland. Tonight is a pottage with peas evening, augmented by a piece of hard cheese per man and an extra cup of ale. After supper, there is a gap, a period of several hours, before the night watches begin. That is, by Garrison custom, the men's own time. What people do with it varies. Walter plays dice with a small group of friends using a set of carved bone dice that he has carried for 20 years and considers, with a degree of superstition unusual in an otherwise practical man, to be personally lucky. Robert, the younger soldier, spends a good portion of this time repairing a leather strap on his boot, a task that in principle takes 20 minutes and, in practice, given his level of skill with an awl and waxed thread, takes nearly an hour. Thomas, on most evenings, sits near the brazier in the sleeping hall and does not much of anything in particular. He has no book most Garrison soldiers cannot read, and he is no exception, and he has no dice game or craft project. He sits, and he is warm, and the brazier produces a low, steady, orange-red glow, and the evening passes. This might seem like wasted time to a modern observer or evidence of boredom. Thomas does not experience it as boredom. He experiences it as rest, as the specific pleasure of having nothing required of him for a defined period, after a day in which something was always required. At 9:30, Edmund comes around with a reminder for the 10 o'clock watch assignment. Thomas puts on his mail coif and his surcoat and collects his billhook. The night watch is different from the morning patrol. The morning patrol happens in a world that is moving toward light, the sky brightening, the birds waking, the castle beginning its day below. The night watch happens in a world that has committed to darkness, and that darkness has a texture and a weight that the transitional dusk does not. Thomas takes the south wall for the first half of his shift from 10 until midnight, and then the gatehouse passage and the outer ward from midnight until 2. The south wall at 10 o'clock in October. The sky is clear tonight, and there are stars. Not the vague suggestion of stars through thin cloud, but the genuine, dense, slightly unsettling number of stars that appears only in a world without electric light. In a countryside where the nearest town is 4 miles away and produces, by the standard of the dark, essentially no ambient glow at all. Thomas knows a few of the constellations by name: the Plough, which is what the English call what some others call the Great Bear, and Orion, which is beginning to appear in the east this time of year, tilted at an angle on the horizon that will gradually steepen as winter deepens. He knows them primarily as a way of telling approximate time in the absence of the sun. Orion's position in the sky at the start of his watch, rising in the east with his belt stars just clearing the tree line, tells him it is approximately 10. By the time Orion has moved to roughly the southeast and climbed perhaps a third of the way up the sky, it will be midnight. This is not precise. It does not need to be precise. A garrison soldier's night watch is not a matter of minutes, it is a matter of hours, and knowing which general region of the night you are in is sufficient. He walks the south wall. 60 feet, turn, 60 feet, turn. The wall beneath his boots is solid and slightly damp from the evening dew. The torches along the south curtain are burning at their 3rd hour, which means they are still healthy, bright, and steady in the still night air. There is no wind. Below the south wall is the kitchen garden, a series of raised beds that in summer produce onions, leeks, cabbages, and herbs, but which are now largely cleared for winter, the beds turned over and mulched with straw. Beyond the garden is the south wall of the outer bailey, and beyond that, open fields. Nothing moves in the fields. The fields are what they always are at night. In October, a flat expanse of pale stubble and dark shadow, faintly luminous under the clear sky, perfectly still. At some point around 11, an owl calls from the direction of the elm trees. It calls twice, then stops. Thomas listens. The owl does not call again. At midnight, he descends from the wall and takes the second half of his shift in the outer ward and the gatehouse passage. The gatehouse passage is perhaps the most specific space in the castle, a tunnel of stone, perhaps 30 feet long and 12 feet wide, running through the thickness of the gatehouse tower, with the heavy timber portcullis at the outer end and the large oak gate at the inner. When both are closed, as they are every night, the passage is entirely sealed, a stone corridor with no light source except the torch mounted on the inner wall about a third of the way through. The passage smells of wet stone, torch smoke, horse, and iron. The iron smell comes from the portcullis and the gate fittings, the great iron hinges, the lock mechanism on the gate, the chain and winch mechanism that raises and lowers the portcullis, all of which produce a faint, persistent oxidation smell that mingles with everything else. Thomas walks through the passage, out of habit, 3 times each hour, once in each direction, and then once more in the original direction, examining the lock on the gate, and checking the portcullis winch mechanism to confirm it is properly set. There is a notched iron pin that locks the winch drum in position, and he confirms its engagement each time by pressing it firmly with the heel of his hand. It has never been out of engagement at any point in his 6 years of service. He checks it every time regardless. After the 3rd passage of each hour, he takes a position in the outer ward near the well and conducts what he thinks of, without using the term, as a listening watch. He stands still for 5 to 10 minutes and simply listens to the sounds of the castle at night. The sounds of a medieval castle at midnight in October, from a position in the outer ward, are as follows: the torch in the gatehouse passage, audible as a faint, irregular crackle when the flame encounters a slightly denser section of the hemp head. This sounds small, occasional, entirely consistent, is present every night, and Thomas hears it without registering it, the way a person living near water hears the water. The horses in the stable block at the north end of the outer ward, moving occasionally in their stalls. The sound of a horse shifting weight in a stable at night is a quiet, heavy, shuffling sound, hooves on straw, the creak of a stall partition, occasionally a soft exhalation. There are 6 horses in the stable tonight, and 1 or 2 of them, the more alert ones, have noticed Thomas's presence and are watching him from over the stall partitions. The wind, intermittently, moving through the crenellations of the wall above. The wind produces different sounds at different speeds and directions, sometimes a low moan across the open crenels, sometimes a sharper whistling through a narrow gap in the stonework, sometimes nothing more than a rush across the exposed top of the wall that is more felt than heard. Occasionally, from the direction of the Garrison hall, snoring. The specific, unambiguous, entirely unremarkable sound of approximately 15 men sleeping. Nothing else. At 2 in the morning, his replacement arrives. A man named Gilbert, blinking in the torchlight, pulling his wool cloak tighter around him. Thomas briefs him in 8 words, all quiet: South wall and gate, Orion west. Gilbert nods. Thomas hands over the billhook. Gilbert will use his own. This is simply the gesture of passing the watch, and walks back to the Garrison hall and his pallet. He is asleep within 4 minutes. Tuesday. The assignments are slightly different. Thomas has the afternoon wall patrol and an evening assignment helping in the stable. The morning is his own, and he spends a portion of it in the armory room, cleaning and oiling the links of his mail coif with a cloth soaked in rendered fat, a task that is required approximately every 2 weeks to prevent rust in damp weather. The mail is a fascinating object, if you think about it, and Thomas, who has been wearing and maintaining it for 6 years, occasionally does. It consists of several thousand, individually forged iron rings, each ring linked through 4 others, creating a fabric of interlocked metal that is flexible enough to move with the body, but provides meaningful protection against slashing cuts. The rings in his coif were made by an armorer in the nearest town, a man who operated a wire drawing bench and a mandrel and could produce 300 rings an hour on a good day. The coif itself contains perhaps 15,000 rings, each one opened, linked to its neighbors, and closed again by hand. 15,000 small acts of manufacturing to protect one man's head. Wednesday. The torch circuit, morning. Breakfast. The mid-morning assignment is a new one. Thomas assists the carpenter, a permanent castle employee, not a garrison soldier, a craftsman named Aldrich, who has worked here for 30 years in conducting a survey of the wooden elements of the wall walk. Not all of the wall walk's surface is stone. Several sections where the original stone paving has been damaged or removed have been covered with heavy oak planking thick boards, each about 3 inches wide and 2 inches thick, laid across stone brackets embedded in the wall. These boards are inspected twice a year for rot and damage, because a rotted board on a wall walk 30 feet above the ground is a genuine hazard, and replacing one board now is enormously preferable to dealing with a guard who has put a foot through the wall walk in the dark. Aldrich moves along the affected sections of wall walk with a short, heavy mallet and a probe, a pointed iron rod about a foot long, tapping each board and probing the edges and corners for softness. Soft wood sounds different from sound wood when struck. It gives slightly under the probe point, when sound wood would not. The difference is obvious to someone who has listened to thousands of boards with this exact method for 30 years. He finds 3 boards in need of replacement. He marks each one with a chalk cross and notes their positions on a small slate he carries for the purpose. The replacement will happen next week, when the timber yard has had time to deliver appropriate oak planks. Thomas assists by carrying Aldrich's tools from section to section and holding the probe when Aldrich needs both hands for a difficult angle. The work takes 3 hours. It is methodical, careful, and produces a specific small satisfaction, the satisfaction of knowing something has been checked, something is recorded, something will be fixed. Thursday.
Rain.
Rain in a medieval castle is not a catastrophe, but it does change the quality of the experience considerably. The wall patrol becomes wetter and colder. The stone surfaces become slicker. The torch performance degrades the pine pitch heads, hold up reasonably well to light rain, but a sustained downpour can shorten a torch's life by half, and in heavy rain, torches in exposed positions will extinguish entirely and need relighting. Thomas's Thursday assignment includes a rain duty that doesn't appear in summer, checking the drainage channels. Medieval castle walls are not flat-topped. The wall walk and the tops of towers are designed to shed water, sloping slightly toward the interior so that rain runs off the exterior face of the parapet and into a series of stone drainage channels, rectangular grooves cut into the inner face of the wall walk that carry the water down through the wall in hollow vertical shafts called gargoyles, or in this context, more precisely waterspouts that discharge the water at the base of the wall into drainage channels in the ward below. These drainage channels at the tops of the walls collect debris. Leaves, dirt, the small stones and grit that accumulate over time. A blocked drainage channel in a rainstorm means standing water on the wall walk, which means the water finds other ways down, seeping through the stonework, widening cracks, weakening mortar. This is a slow process, but it is how walls fail over decades. Thomas clears the drainage channels on the north wall with a wooden-handled iron scraper in his fingers. The accumulated debris damp leaves, compacted grit, one dead bird that has somehow become lodged in the channel behind the second gargoyle from the west comes out in clumps. The water released runs down the channel and out through the gargoyle with a satisfying gurgling sound. He is soaked through by 10 o'clock. Friday. The rain has stopped. The castle has that particular quality that follows a day of rain, the stone darker and cleaner, the air cold and clear, every surface damp and reflecting what pale light the October sky offers. The drainage channels are running with clean water from the residual moisture in the stonework. Thomas has the morning free. He sits in the Garrison hall and watches the steam rise from his boots, which he has placed near the brazier to dry. He drinks a second cup of ale. He says very little. Around him, the Garrison goes about its Friday morning. Edmund is updating the ledger with the week's notes. Walter is losing a dice game with apparently complete equanimity. Robert is repairing the boot strap he repaired on Monday and somehow managed to undo in the interim. Outside, the outer ward is busy in the mild way that a castle's outer ward is always busy in the middle of the morning. A cartload of firewood arriving through the outer gate. The blacksmith's forge producing its familiar rhythmic clanging from the smithy in the northwest corner, the bakehouse chimney trailing white smoke. The castle keeps going. It does not require anything dramatic to justify its continued functioning. It simply goes the same routines, the same sequences, the same careful attention to the things that need attention. Thomas has been a Garrison soldier for 6 years. Before that, he worked on his father's tenant farm about 12 miles from here, until the farm ran into 2 consecutive bad harvests, and his father could not keep all 3 of his sons on the land. Thomas was the middle son. The middle son went to find work elsewhere. Garrison service was not the most prestigious employment available to a man of Thomas's station, but it was steady, and it provided food and shelter and a small but reliable wage, approximately 2 pence per day, paid weekly by the castle constable from the Lord's treasury, in coin that could be spent at the village market or saved in the small leather purse Thomas keeps in the locked box under his pallet. He has, in 6 years, saved approximately 4 shillings. This is not a large sum. It would buy roughly 4 days of an unskilled laborer's wages in today's terms, if we're being honest, but it represents 6 years of small decisions to spend less than he earned. And Thomas considers it, with some quiet satisfaction, a form of prudence. What made a medieval castle actually function, what kept the Lord's household fed and the garrison healthy and the building standing, was not the dramatic elements. It was not the battles, which were rare. It was not the feasts, which happened a few times a year. It was not the arrivals of important visitors or the dramatic councils of war. It was the torches, replaced on schedule. The provisions, counted and noted. The walls, walked every 4 hours through every night. The drainage channels, cleared before they blocked. The mail, cleaned and oiled before it rusted. The bread, baked from the stored flour, which was stored in the sacks counted in the undercroft, which were themselves the result of the grain harvest, managed by the agricultural routine of the surrounding farms. It was Thomas, on the wall at 4 in the morning with a torch and a bill hook, walking 60 feet forward and 60 feet back in the cold October dark, confirming that nothing was wrong. It was men like him, across the medieval world. In castles large and small, not the famous ones, not the ones with plaques and visitor centers, doing the specific, unremarkable, essential things that kept those structures not just standing but functioning. Day after day, year after year, decade after decade, the castle does not know their names. The history books, with their kings and their battles, have not recorded them. But the walls stand, some of them. Anyway, still stand, 800 years later, the stone worn smooth in the centers of doorways by generations of feet. The soot marks, still visible in faint traces above the old torch brackets. The drainage channels still cut at their precise and purposeful angles. Those stones were walked by Thomas, by Walter and Hugh and Gilbert, by Edmund with his ledger and Aldrich with his mallet and Geoffrey with his 2 cloaks and his extraordinary ear for the sound of a cheese wheel. By ordinary men doing ordinary work in the cold and the dark and the damp with sufficient care that the thing kept going. It is Sunday evening, the end of the week. In the Garrison hall, the brazier is lit and the room is warm. The men who are not on watch sit in the amber light of tallow, candles a small luxury, candles instead of torches, for the evening rest and the sound of the week's last dice game and the smell of tallow smoke and the residual warmth from the day's baking drift together into something that is, in its very plainness, deeply comfortable. Thomas has the evening free. He is sitting on his pallet with his back against the wall and his boots off, which feels, after a week of nearly constant boot wearing, genuinely and specifically pleasant. The wool blanket is pulled around his shoulders. He is doing nothing in particular. Tomorrow it begins again. Monday, the torch circuit before dawn, the wall patrol, the pottage and the bread. The slow turn of the wall walk underfoot, 60 feet forward, 60 feet back, the confirmation that nothing is wrong, the careful verification that everything is in its place. He is not dreading it. He is not, precisely, looking forward to it either. It is simply what happens next. It is the shape of the time ahead, already known, already walked in some sense, comfortable in its familiarity. The same stone, the same cold, the same orange glow of the torch brackets against the night. Outside, the October wind moves along the top of the north wall, the same north wall, the same crenellations, the same worn stone surface of the wall walk, and makes the particular sound it makes when it is neither strong enough to be a wind in any dramatic sense, nor quite still enough to call quiet. The castle rests. The torches burn. Somewhere in the elm trees, one of the rooks settles itself with a small sound. And Thomas sleeps.